AITA for wanting to leave my wife since she wants to return to her hometown now? Update 1 okay, so I checked over the comments, and I want to thank everyone who took the time to write a remark and provide me advice. After reading these remarks, I decided to spend some more time thinking about what I actually wanted to pursue. Because everything I claimed in my previous article was accurate. The house was in better shape, and they were able to sort anything out legally. I doubt Allison and Hannah would have contacted me again. And that's what's really bugged me. They wouldn't have contacted me if everything had been wonderful in another place. I don't want to be their fallback choice, if that makes sense. And, clearly, I have nothing against Hannah, she's only a kid. I've watched her grow up over the last several years, and she still has a lot of maturing to do, so I'm not furious with her in the least. But Allison has a different narrative. She's a mature lady, and I'm not sure what to make of her. She believes I am blaming her and portraying her as the bad person, but I believe she is doing the same to me, and I believe she is gaslighting me into feeling that I am the villain in this situation. She's continuously rejecting my sentiments, and the fact that she branded me a crybaby, a selfish person, a coward, and so on has made it really difficult for me to cope with all of this alone. I'm not sure how to cope with the issue, and I feel awful for all of us right now since, for the past several years, we've been one happy family, but I can feel that family coming apart. I didn't want that to happen, but I also don't have a choice in the matter. She disrespected me, and if she comes back and sincerely apologizes for everything, I'm willing to make it work. I actually love her and honestly care for her, and I will do anything to get our relationship back on track, but she must take the initiative and at least attempt to show me that she cares as well. It does not appear to feel that way. Just as when she first left, she hasn't contacted me and is acting as if I don't exist. The last communication I received from her was almost 2 weeks ago, before any of this began, and neither she nor Hannah have talked to me since. So I don't know what to do anymore. I want to make it work, but she must want the same thing as well. Until then, we'll simply be stuck here. Report 2, it's been a week since my previous report, and Allison and Hannah returned this afternoon. Once again, I was dumb enough to believe that they were coming to make things right with me, but when I opened the door, Allison informed me that they merely came to pack the last items that they had left here. They'd even brought a pickup vehicle and a friend to assist them get back, so I knew they were serious. I was so unhappy because I was just waiting for Allison to talk to me, to give me a clue that maybe things weren't as terrible as we thought, and we might still save our marriage. But instead, she was willing to give up so quickly, so I decided to meet with her privately, and I told her that I was really upset with the way she was handling things. We had been together for some years, and I felt we were stronger than this, so I couldn't comprehend her behavior. She just seemed resigned when she spoke to me, and she told me that she was tired of arguing with me, and it didn't make her happy to be leaving me like way, but she also thought that I owed her an apology. And I knew that if I attempted to fight with her about it, we'd wind up going in circles again. Because she believed I owed her an apology for not being there for her, and I felt the same way but for her. Instead of continuing down that road again, I informed her that whatever had happened was over, and all we could do was attempt to go on. But we owed it to one other to give our relationship another shot, and a genuine fighting chance at that. I expected her to agree, but instead she told me that she was really unhappy that things had ended out this way, but with everything that had occurred, she didn't believe that giving our relationship a chance would work. Because she eventually wanted to return to her hometown to be with her family and friends. She had had enough of living here and intended to return in a few months. So it wasn't only about the house she intended to return, and the house served as a trigger for her choice. I will have to acknowledge. That threw me off guard because I had imagined it would be about the house rather than wanting to relocate back. I couldn't promise her anything since I wasn't sure whether I was ready to go to her hometown with her, or if I ever would be. So when she told me that this was the real reason, she hadn't bothered to contact me in the previous few weeks because staying with her parents for the next 2 weeks made her feel like she was missing out on a lot of time with them, and she wanted to be closer to them. But she knew I wouldn't want to move back with her. She had clashed with me and eventually tried to loathe me. But she couldn't bring herself to do it since she realized I had a point. If I'm being honest, I just assumed she wanted to move back, because of the house, and that it was just a phase. But hearing her admit that she wanted to move back because she wanted to be close to everything she knew made me wonder if I misunderstood her, and it wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment, impulsive decision. I honestly thought we'd fight again, but when she told me about it, I attempted to see her point of view, because I was weary of battling with her, and didn't see the sense in arguing with her over and over again. That was just going to injure both of us. She even asked if I would be willing to consider moving back in with her, and I told her that I would need some time to think about it since I had been under the notion that I could talk her out of doing it, but that was clearly not the case. When I mentioned that, she said she understood and that I could take as much time as I needed, but that we would ultimately have to decide what we wanted to do. Then she went back to packing, and all I could do was sit silently and attempt to figure out what was going on. Even as she was departing, she assured me that I still had time to consider what I wanted. She wasn't going to change her mind, and if I couldn't handle it, she was happy with that as well. It was a lot today, and I found myself wishing I hadn't opened the door to let them in since I wouldn't have known about anything, and I believe being furious at her was much simpler than trying to comprehend and live with this scenario. But now that I know what's going on, I need to figure out what I want and what my priorities are. It's been toying with my brain, but I know I'll have to make a decision at some point, and whatever I choose will be difficult. I'll be the one forced to make certain sacrifices, and no matter what I sacrifice, it will still pain me. So, needless to say, I'm in a very delicate situation right now, and my position is not easy given that I have all of my family, friends, and even employment here. I realize I'm babbling, but I just don't know what to make of this scenario anymore. Update 3. After thinking about everything for 3 weeks, I eventually contacted Allison and informed her that I would not be relocating back to her hometown with her. It was not an easy decision for me, but I had to do what was best for me. And as I mentioned in my last update, all of my friends, family, and even my job are here, and I can't give up everything. Even if I attempted to come back here every weekend, I couldn't figure out how to make it work for my business. And I've spent a significant amount of my life establishing this firm from the ground up. I have a lot of workers that rely on me, so I can't just pass it on to someone else or sell it, and then walk on. So, with a heavy heart, I decided not to stay married to Allison since she and I both deserve the right to live our lives as we see fit. When I told her about my session after 3 weeks of no communication, she appeared upset but did not argue with me. She told me she understood and wished me well in the future, but she hoped I would forgive her and understand where she was coming from as well. And I do believe it must have been difficult for her to be away from her family for so long. But the main reason she left her hometown in the first place was to establish a life for herself away from everything she knew, away from her comfort zone. She wanted independence and freedom, which she had previously obtained, but now that we were both of an age when we want comfort, it was natural for her to want to return to her comfort zone. We discussed it and agreed, and that we would petition for divorce on mutual grounds and terminate our marriage amicably. But first, we had to decide what we wanted to do for Hannah, who seemed distraught about having to leave me behind. Allison had previously told her not to contact her because she wasn't sure what I wanted, but now she has asked. And I told her that I would love to have partial custody, or at least visiting rights, because Hannah is someone I've watched grow up over the last few years and I would really like to have her in my life. I can't help the situation with Allison right now. But I also don't want to let go of Hannah since I'm quite devoted to her and consider her my own kid. I hadn't reached out to her yet because I didn't believe it would be proper without first speaking with Allison, but now that we're both on the same page, we'll decide what to do, and before that, I'll finally meet Hannah after a long time. Update 4. Hello, I just returned from seeing Hannah and Allison, and my heart is full right now. I released my previous update 3 days ago, and since then, I was simply trying to focus and digest the idea that I was getting divorced and Allison would no longer be a part of my life. I thought I had accepted it. But the more I reflected about it, the more I regretted it. I think talking to her about it made it more real, but I couldn't back out of my promise, so I had to just suck it up and mentally prepare myself to face her. But the moment I got inside her friend's apartment, where she had been staying, I sort of broke down, and so did she, and I realized why we hadn't been seeing one other. Because we knew that the moment we saw one other, we wouldn't be able to hold back, because no matter how much I wanted to dislike her, I couldn't because I loved her. And I think she does as well, since as soon as I saw each other, we both burst into tears and hugged each other, because it had been so long since we had last met. She immediately informed me that she had decided to return to her hometown to be closer to her friends and family, as well as her previous life, but she was no longer certain. I was overjoyed to hear that since it meant we were now on the same page, and she had taken the initiative to express it to me. After many tears, embracing, and making up, we decided to put all of our plans on wait and go to marriage counseling. If there was still a possibility we might work out our differences and make our marriage work, I was willing to take that risk. I had simply gone over to meet Hannah, but I'm pleased I was able to resolve things with Allison as well. She is currently living with her friend, but she will be packed and ready to move back tomorrow, and I can't wait for her to return. Hannah is obviously overjoyed that we are not separating and has decided to give our marriage another opportunity. But of course we can't ignore the reality that all of this came from Allison's feeling far from her family, so we've agreed to try to see them every weekend rather than every 2 months. We will not create excuses for ourselves, and even if we are really busy with work and other obligations, we must make time for those we care about, which is a lesson we have had to learn the hard way. Anyway, I'm just glad we're going to try to make it work because I adore her, and knowing that she feels the same way is really reassuring. Hopefully counseling will make things better. Wife and stepdaughter wanted to move into her ex's house, but I objected since I was uncomfortable with the concept, so they abandoned me for many weeks. Now they're back, but it's too late. My wife Allison and stepdaughter Hannah have lived with me for the past 3 years. Allison, 42F, and I, 46M, began dating 5 years ago and married 2 years ago. Hannah is 16, and Allison has had full custody of her daughter since their divorce 12 years ago. Allison and her ex were high school sweethearts who married as soon as they completed college, but Allison informed me that things were not meant to be between them. Her ex was extremely ambitious, and when they married, he began to take her for granted, seldom spending time at home. She sought marriage counseling as well, but nothing changed, and they divorced. So after 6 years of marriage, she decided to terminate it and requested full custody of their kid, since she didn't think he was capable of parenting her alone when she wasn't with him. And she was correct. So he didn't argue and settled with visiting her on weekends. Allison then opted to relocate for better possibilities roughly 3 years after her divorce, which is how she came to be with me. She obtained a job here, where I am from, and it is just a 6-hour drive from her homeland, so she can see her parents anytime she likes, and her ex can also come see their daughter on weekends. Her ex was not pleased with her choice to relocate since it would make it more difficult for him to visit his kid, and their relationship had deteriorated more since she came here. The last nail in the coffin came when she married me, and after that, he seldom spoke to her unless it was about Hannah, so it wasn't strange that he hadn't left anything for her in his will, which only mentioned Hannah. Allison and I had anticipated this because their relationship had not been great at the end. When her ex was originally diagnosed with heart difficulties, she attempted to bury the hatchet and be there for him, but he turned down her offers to be his buddy, so she didn't push me any harder since it was clear that he didn't want her in his life, and we tried to keep our distance from him in the latter phases. But when we found out that Dad had given the house to Hannah, she and Allison began rejoicing, which didn't make sense to me because we already had a place to live, and that was my home here. The house her ex had left was all the way back in their hometown, and they were talking about moving into it, which I was not comfortable with and told them about, which sparked the entire dispute. When Hannah and her mother learned from the lawyer that she would inherit the home when she reached 18, they immediately began planning their future and discussing what they were going to do with it and how they were going to refurbish it all. They had gotten a slew of images from the lawyer, and I could see that it was far larger than the house we were already living in, but this house was mine, and my entire existence was centered here. So before they could let their imaginations run wild, I decided to bust their bubble and tell them that I was uncomfortable with the prospect of relocating to this new house and leaving everything behind. That startled them a little. I'm not sure why, given they should have expected this. Allison tried to persuade me to sell the property and go with them to their hometown because she had been living here for the previous several years and missed her family and old friends. She had spent so many years with me that it was my responsibility to make some sacrifices for her and relocate with them. I believed it was unfair of her to draw that comparison because when she arrived here, she had no idea she would meet me. She had relocated here for herself, not for me, and I brought it up with her, but she simply became upset with me. She and Hannah had pretty much decided they wanted to go, and because they had already made up their minds, they didn't want to hear me out, but rather persuade me to join them. We fought for a few days, but ultimately they simply told me that they were going to go check out the home and live there for a few days to test everything, and that if I wanted to come, I could, but that if I didn't, they wouldn't wait for me either. They departed after that, which was quite upsetting for me since I felt abandoned just because I refused to move into that house. If I'm being honest, one of the main reasons I wasn't happy about moving there was because it used to be Allison and her ex-husband's former house when they lived together. Apparently, he repurchased it a few years ago when he had the money, despite the fact that he had not resided there. He owned it. Possibly for emotional reasons. I'd feel like an invader if I lived there, and most importantly, all of my family and friends resided here, and I didn't want to abandon them. My business was also situated here, so leaving everything behind would be a problem. Anyway, a few days after learning about the house, Allison and Hannah packed some of their belongings and left without me after I informed them that I was not interested in viewing the place. I was disappointed when they went, but I tried not to show it because I didn't believe they would care in the first place. It wasn't until after they departed that I allowed myself to cry, and then I told my parents what had occurred, and they didn't have a remedy for me. They had promised me they would only be gone for a few days, but over 2 weeks had passed and I had not heard from them. They had not only abandoned me, but they had also stopped communicating to me entirely, following our disagreement, which devastated my heart. I had planned to meet with Allison once they returned from their vacation home and attempt to work things out with her, but after over 10 days of no communication, I began to reconsider my choice. On the 12th day, I eventually phoned my lawyer, telling them that it could be time to draft divorce papers since I couldn't think of any other way out of this. Thankfully, my lawyer is an old friend of mine, and he advised me to meet with Allison when she returned or phone her before filing for divorce. So I decided to wait for her to return so that we could at least communicate and give our relationship one more shot before calling it off. And 2 days later, she arrived with Hannah in the evening, both of them looking really stressed. I welcomed them in and allowed them to speak with me, thinking that they were coming to apologize for all that had transpired. But instead, she simply told me that they had decided to put the idea of moving into that house on hold for the time being because there was a lot of work to be done, and that the pictures the lawyer had shown them were clearly from a long time ago because when they saw the house in person, it was nothing like that. For several minutes, they spoke about the home and nothing else, and the longer they talked about themselves, the worse I felt since, like a fool, I had allowed them in expecting an apology. At the very least, I expected them to own their mistakes. Apparently, the house was in really horrible shape. None of the facilities worked properly. There were plenty of bat and bird droppings on the flooring. Several mice and other creatures had built their homes inside the house. Worst of all, there appeared to be a severe termite infestation. Everything was quite filthy, and it was clear that no one had cared for the house while the owner, her ex, was away. So that was part of the reason they couldn't move in right now. Even while their 2 weeks there, they had to live with Allison's parents. The only reason they did not return after the first night was that they were discussing with the lawyer about whether they would be able to obtain possession of the house, which there was no language for in the will. And until then, the lawyer would administer the trust for her, and Hannah would only legally own the house until she reached 18, at which point she would be free to move in any time she chose. Allison and the lawyer had been talking for 2 weeks because she wanted to move in as soon as possible, preferably by the end of the year, but that was just a few months ago, and the will itself was still being probated. That is why they opted to return home plainly. It was not the ideal moment for them to move in. After they explained everything to me, I told Allison that I was glad she finally found a place to live since I was no longer interested in living with her. I informed her that she had been extremely harsh and disrespectful to me and my sentiments, and she had not even apologized for any of it, so I asked her to go. She was taken aback when I mentioned that and instructed Hannah to go to her room so we could chat in person. When we were alone, I informed her that I had only allowed her and Hannah in because I expected them to apologize. I could still overlook Hannah since she was a child, but Allison was an adult who understood what she was doing. The only reason she bothered to contact me was that the house was now unlivable. If the house had been in decent shape, she would not have bothered to contact me, and we would most likely be divorced right now since I would not change my mind about relocating, and it was clear that she would not either. So, keeping that in mind, I decided it was better for us to split ways now than to wait for the future and go our own ways later. When I said so, she yelled at me, accusing me of being unreasonable and dumb. She informed me that I was the one who wanted to divorce, and that I was willing to give up on our marriage and relationship over something so trivial, implying that I was not serious about us. She mentioned again how she had spent so many years living with me, near to my family and friends, and that the least she could ask from me was to spend some time in her hometown with her family and friends so she could be close to them. But I had let her down, which was really selfish of me, especially now. I threatened to leave and force her out since they refused to apologize for something that was not even their fault. I tried to dispute with her, but she was having none of it and started shouting at me. She labeled me an awful human being for not understanding her sentiments and then acting as if she was the culprit here, and even branded me a crybaby because if I couldn't even man up and be there for my wife and children, I deserved the label. Finally, she informed me that if I truly wanted her and Hannah out of my life, they would gladly go. But she only wanted me to understand that the way I was acting was cowardly and selfish. Selfishly, I rejected to accompany her to her birthplace, despite the fact that she had lived in my city for quite some time. But I don't think it's the same thing. But it was very cowardly because she apparently believes that I should have been there for her and Hannah. But I was so caught up in my own feelings that I didn't even care about theirs, and because I couldn't handle the fact that they had different opinions, I tried to make them the villains and myself the victim. She had already packed her backpack when she returned, so all she had to do was collect Hannah and the two of them went. I didn't have the heart to call them after that. But I know they're now staying with a friend of hers. Her buddy texted me to let me know that they were there and that both of them were quite annoyed with me, so if I wanted to clear things up, I had best do so immediately. 2 days have gone, and I haven't been able to do anything swiftly since I don't know what to do.